Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be pressure canning some chicken stock and learning some pressure canning basics. So in my previous video, we made 2 big batches of chicken bone broth or chicken stock, and we talked about really great medicinal herbs that you could add to that to add some added nutrition and medicinal benefit. I recommend you check out that video. I'll post it right up here. So today, because I don't want it taking up space in my freezer, I'm going to be pressure canning that chicken bone broth. And I know pressure canning can seem really intimidating. I know the first time that I did it, about 6 years ago, I was definitely nervous and I just stared at the pressure gauge the entire time. But it's well worth learning this skill. And as long as you're comfortable with following instructions, not being a renegade in the kitchen, and not skipping any steps, I promise you pressure canning is not as scary as it seems. If you're a pressure canning pro, you might want to skip this next part. If not, grab a pen and some paper and we're going to go into some pressure canning basics. Okay, so when do I need pressure canning and when don't I? These are really great questions. If you've been doing water bath canning, you're probably familiar with the idea that water bath canning is for high acid foods. These are things like jams, fruit, pickles, chutneys, anything that's got high acid content. Once we get into a pH of 4.6 or greater, we are now in the land of low pressure food. So this would be our soup stocks, anything with meat. If you want to can vegetables in water, there's not enough acidity in those items to safely water bath can them. So that's when we have to pressure can. And there's no way around this. I have heard so many stories. Oh, I just stuck it in my manure pile or I used my dishwasher. No. You 100% for low acid foods, you absolutely have to pressure can. And here's the reason. There's this misconception that canning is only about lids sealing, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, that is one side effect and one thing that we want. We want food preserved, almost like you've pressed pause on that food and you've preserved it in the jar. But the second part is killing off bacteria, specifically botulism. And with low acid foods, you require a temperature of 240 degrees Fahrenheit or 116 degrees Celsius to kill off botulism. And it doesn't matter how long you keep that low acid food boiling in your water bath canner. You could keep it in there for 90 hours for all you want, and it is never going to reach the temperatures required to kill off botulism. And because botulism smells and tastes like nothing, you'll never know if your food is contaminated. So please trust me on this. There's no way around it. If you want to can any of your low acid foods, you absolutely need a pressure canner. All right, so this is my 23 quart Presto pressure canner. There are other brands out there. There are smaller Presto brands, and there is of course the All-American pressure canner. Personally, for me, this has absolutely suited my needs. The All-American pressure canner is a beast. It's huge, it's quite a bit heavier than this one, and because I also have an induction stove, I can't use a pressure canner of that weight. One of the reasons why we have issues with glass top stoves and pressure canning, there's 2 reasons. One, the weight of the canner itself can actually crack the glass top. And 2, you have to ensure that you have a flat surface so that way you're getting even heat in your canner. And that can be the difficulty. So make sure you check your manual and you are buying the appropriate pressure canner for your stove. So like I said, this is my 23 quart pressure canner from Presto. You're going to want, I recommend getting a couple of good books. So the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving is fantastic. It's going to have all of your high acid recipes as well as your low acid recipes. Another really good one, if you can find one, is your Bernardin Guide to Home Canning. And just in case you weren't aware, Bernardin and Ball are the same company. And all of their recipes are USDA tested and approved, so you know that they've been checked by canning scientists. Another one, if you really want to get into pressure canning, is the Complete Guide to Pressure Canning. This one's got some really wicked recipes in it. Soups, stews, chicken with red beans and rum. I mean, come on. So I'll post a link to all these books below. Another thing I recommend getting, other than of course your pressure canner, is buying an additional weighted gauge. Let's see if I can show you guys close up. So the one that my canner came with was this one. This is your standard weighted gauge. And when we get into the pressure canning process, I'll explain how all of these little gadgets and doodads work. But the one that it comes with fits on the exhaust port right here, but it's only good for 15 pounds of pressure. Most recipes, including the one we're going to be canning up today, require 10 pounds of pressure. And so this one has the ability to measure 5 pounds of pressure with a single ring on, 10 pounds of pressure, 5 pounds with no ring on, 10 pounds with a single ring, and 15 pounds with the second ring on. So this allows you to get a little bit more specific. Most canners will come with a gauge, but this is one of the first things to go. So it's really wise to spend the extra 30 bucks and get a weighted gauge appropriate for the pressure you need, because just in case your gauge isn't quite accurate, you'll know that you're at the right amount of pressure because of your weighted gauge. So I'm just going to prep my canner before I start to fill my jars, because my chicken stock or chicken bone broth is almost at a full rolling boil. So make sure you check the manual for your canner. I can only speak about the 23 quart Presto canner. At the bottom of my canner, I forgot to mention it before, is your canning rack. It is going to look quite a bit different than the one that you have for water bath canning. I have two, because you can actually, if you're doing smaller jars, you can actually double stack in these. So I've got my canning rack at the bottom, and I have 2 quarts of water, and I'm about to add my third, which is about 3.5 liters for my Canadian friends out there. Again, this is not like water bath canning. You're not going to be submersing your jars in water. You need just enough water, following your canner's instructions. We also have very, very hard water here, so you can add up to 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this is at about a simmer or keeping it nice and warm. You want to make sure that when you're putting your jars into your canner, that the water in the canner is not cold. Everything that's going into your jars is going to be hot packed at boiling temperatures. If you put it in cold water, your jars will surely crack. So I'm going to get this onto the stove and start warming, and now we're going to fill our jars. All right, I'm about to start filling my jars. So I have my chicken stock or chicken bone broth that is at a full rolling boil. Just took it off the stove. You can see all the steam coming off. I have brand new canning lids that have been washed and cleaned with hot water. I also have rings. You can reuse your rings. You can reuse your jars. As long as you don't have any cracks on your jars and your rings are in good shape, you can reuse those as many times as you want, but don't cheap out. Make sure you get yourself some new lids, because they will not, most of the time, will not seal a second time. And for the $2 this box costs, it's worth it. I also have a clean cloth that I will wipe the rim of my jars with. And I've got a measuring cup to pour out my soup stock. Just a side note, the USDA has recently changed their canning protocols. You used to have to sterilize your jars for every single canning recipe, meaning you had to boil them in really, really hot water for a long time. Look into the new USDA rules. Those really cool canning scientists I told you about before, they have now told us that the jars self-sterilize during the canning process. So as long as you are water bath canning for more than 10 minutes, or you are pressure canning, you just need to make sure that your jars are clean and hot. They will self-sterilize during the canning process. So I wash them with hot water, and we do pour boiling water over them. Again, a lot of this has to do with ensuring that the jars don't crack. When you're doing your bone broth, you want to leave at least 1 inch of headspace. I like to leave a little extra just to be safe. I also like to strain out any of the extra herb bits that were in there. And if you do have a large amount of fat on your stock, you're going to want to skim that off too. So like I said, I like to leave a little extra headspace when I'm pressure canning. I'm going to take my clean cloth, wipe the rim. I'm going to put a brand new lid on, and you're going to screw your snap ring on fingertip tight. Then this is going to go into the canner. Remember, that canner doesn't have cold water. It's got nice hot water in it. And when I have them all filled, I'll show you the next step of the process. All right, we filled our 1 liter jars. We made enough soup stock, chicken stock, bone broth for 6 1 liter jars. So that was 2 of my Instant Pots. I usually like this canner, the 23 quart Presto canner, can fit 7 1 liter jars comfortably. You can't really do any more than that. Now, regardless of how many jars you're canning, you're still going to want that 3 quarts or that 3.5 liters of water that I told you about that's at the bottom of the canner. It doesn't matter how many jars you're canning, that's how much water goes in. I've got my stove on high, and the next step is to seal my canner. So you'll see my canner's got like a nice little arrow here that matches up with the arrow on the handle. And you'll be able to, you can kind of see it's a very tight seal. So the problems with pressure canning are when people, like I said, they try to make the process go faster, they skip the steps, they don't follow the rules. So what we're waiting for now is for the water in here to come to a boil. Once it does that, you're going to start to see steam coming out of the exhaust port. I'll get my husband to go in a little closer so you can see what the exhaust port looks like. You're going to see steam come out. You're going to want to wait 10 minutes for all of the air to exhaust out of your canner. So that's what's happening when the steam is coming out of your exhaust port. It is literally evacuating all of the air out of the canner. So don't skip that step, 10 minutes. Then you're going to want to put your weighted gauge on, and I'll show you this process once we get there. Super quick video, just to show you what you're looking for. This is my pressure canner exhausting the air from the inside. You can see my timer going off in the background. So once it's been 10 minutes, I'll show you what to do next. All right, so we've got 20 seconds left. As you can see, my canner is still exhausting just that little bit of air that's left inside. Once my timer goes off, I'm gonna wanna put my weighted gauge on. As I mentioned, soup stocks, bone broths of any kind require 10 pounds of pressure. So I'm gonna take off 1 ring to make it 10 pounds of pressure. There's my timer. So then all you have to do, very carefully, place your weight on your canner. You can see in the back here that the pressure gauge is up, okay? It is now sticking up. That's because there is actually a bit of pressure inside the canner. What we're waiting for now is for this gauge, if your gauge is still functioning, of course, for this gauge to reach at least 10, I always go to 11. Whenever I require 10 pounds of pressure for a recipe, I go to 11. What's really cool about the weighted gauge that goes over top of the exhaust port, it serves 2 purposes. 1, it's no longer allowing anything to escape, but 2, once it reaches 10 pounds of pressure, it's actually going to start to dance and jiggle for us. And that's how you know you've reached the appropriate pressure for your recipe. So just in case your dial here is no longer functioning, these tend to be the first thing that go. You can get them calibrated, it's kind of expensive. You've got your weighted gauge to fall back on. If it's not dancing, it's not at pressure. So for this recipe, if you are at sea level, you're going to want to keep your 1 liter jars at 10 pounds, at least 10 pounds of pressure for 25 minutes. If you're using 500 milliliter jars, this drops down to 20 minutes. If you are above 1,000 feet above sea level, make sure you get a canning book or look online to find out how you need to adjust your times based on elevation. So once this reaches 10 or 11 pounds of pressure, I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so we are almost at 10 pounds of pressure. There was something I forgot to mention in the previous segment. Remember how I said that's 10 pounds of pressure for 25 minutes? If at any point during the canning process, your pressure drops below what your recipe states, 10 pounds, 15, whatever that may be, you need to start the timer all over again. So it's really important that you keep that pressure consistent. You don't want a lot of fluctuations. You know, you don't want it to be at 11, then 15, then back down to 12. And so the trick is getting to know your stove. Once it reaches pressure, that's just gonna take a bit of practice. I know on my stove that I need to have the heat between about 7 and 8, and then it stays pretty stable. Like I said, that's just gonna be a bit of practice and getting to know your canner and your stove. So let's check it out. We're at about 11 pounds of pressure. And as you can see, just like I said, that weight is dancing. So she's a-jiggling. And my gauge is actually still very accurate. So you can see that it is just above 10 pounds of pressure. As long as this guy jiggles and dances, we know that we are at least 10 pounds or above in pressure. So this is where I'm going to set my oven timer for 25 minutes. Here I go. Oh, not 40 minutes. And as long as it stays stable at this pressure for that 25 minutes, we are good to go. Do not touch your canner. Do not move your canner. Do not take the lid off your canner. This is when you just kind of pop in and make sure that you're at a stable pressure. So I'm going to start to reduce the heat a little bit on my stove, because if you keep it at high, that's just going to keep building and building. So like I said, this is where you're going to develop a bit of a relationship between your canner and your stove and learn that sweet spot. So once this is completely done, it's 25 minutes in the pressure canner, I'll show you what to do next. All right, so the 25 minutes is up. What you want to do now is turn off your burner. So I've already done that. And then again, do not touch your canner. Don't move it, don't shimmy it, don't shuffle it. Remember, this thing is now under 10 pounds of pressure. So we really don't want any movement at all. If you need this burner for something, you're just going to have to wait. So the next step of the process is to let the pressure drop naturally. If you have an Instant Pot, you're familiar with this process, except there's no pressure relief valve on a pressure canner. So you're just gonna have to leave it be. And it may take up to an hour, but that's totally fine. I wanna go over again the fact that I am using a pressure canner on a glass stove, because I know I'm gonna get questions about this. Number one, I am using a Presto, which is not nearly as heavy as an All-American canner. The All-American canners weigh about 4 times the amount of the 23-quart Presto canner. So weight is a main problem with glass top stoves and canners because it cracks the glass. It just can't handle it. Can I can 2 layers of jars in this canner? I absolutely can. Do I? No. Again, I'm concerned about weight. So as long as I keep it at a single layer, I've never ever had an issue. Another thing to be aware of is that you don't want a canner that has any kind of a concave or curved bottom, because then you're not going to get even heating. I'm sure some of you probably have some of those pots that jiggle on your induction stove. That's the reason why you need a canner with a flat bottom. So once the pressure has completely dropped, I'll show you what that looks like, and we'll talk about the last steps of your pressure canning process. All right, so as you can see, we've got no more jiggling. My gauge is down to 0, but the number one thing you want to look for is that this pressure gauge has dropped back down. This means that there's no longer any pressure inside of your canner. So while that is still up, you don't want to take the lid off. Now it's perfectly safe for me to remove the weight and to take the lid off. So it's very, very hot in there. So what I usually do is I let my jars sit with the lid off for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I take my jars out and I let them sit on the counter. Just like with water bath canning, make sure you put your jars in a spot where they're not going to be disturbed for about 24 hours. That's how long the process takes. After about an hour, I usually do test the lids. If they're going to seal, or if you're going to have a seal failure, it usually does happen within the first hour or two. And if I have any lids that didn't seal for some reason, which is very rare, I then know I have to refrigerate that one. But if you don't catch that until 24 hours, then whatever was sitting on your counter at room temperature, unfortunately, has to be disposed of. So I usually do just a quick test. And then when I'm ready to store my jars in my pantry, I remove the rings, I label them, and then put them in the pantry. You can't resist the chance to be in front of the camera, eh? So thank you so very much for watching this video on canning your own chicken bone broth or chicken soup stock and learning a little bit about pressure canning. If you have any questions about pressure canning, please leave them below. And if I get lots of questions, maybe I can do an FAQ in a future video. So until next time, this is Correne from Spirea Herbs, wishing you health and wellness.